First of all, meet the lecturers. So, Melody's our president. Melody, do you want to say something?
Hey everyone, thanks for coming to this workshop. This is going to be taught by Claire, and then so she's going to go over a couple things about descriptive writing. We hope you stay the whole way, and at the very end, we are going to have a feedback form where we'd like you to give advice, suggestions, or just general feedback about the workshop.
It's Claire. I'm the vice president, and a goose would swim faster than me, but I could definitely outbike it. So in a triathlon, I think it would come down to whoever could run faster. I think this is important information that you should know about me before we begin this workshop. So lastly, our third lecture is, of course, the amazing Snowflake, who is our mascot. And over here is a bunch of links. First, we'll teach you about the informational stuff and the basics of what you need to know. And then we can work on like seeing examples of descriptive writing. And finally, we can look at some pictures and you guys can do the descriptive writing yourselves. And this is a good way to learn it, I think. And I know a lot of you are probably here because of the ELA aspect of it, so we'll get to that too. First thing that we're going to learn about in this presentation is literary devices. There's similes. I group these literary devices together based on certain things and similar, but also some of them are just kind of like based on their purposes, like what they're used for, and kind of like how they're similar. So first of all is a simile and a metaphor. I think a lot of you already know what both of these are. A simile is like when you compare two things to each other and you use like or as. For example, you could say, she was as pretty as a flower. And this would be a simile because you're using the words like or as while also comparing two things together. Honestly, similes can be a lot different than that sometimes, but those are the basics that you need to know. Second of all is the metaphor, which is kind of similar to similes, except they're pretty different because metaphors uses is or was to describe and compare two things to each other. For example, she is a flower. She's not actually a flower because that would be kind of weird, but we're comparing her to a flower because both of them are very pretty. Next up is the second grouping, which is alliterations and onomatopoeias. So these aren't similar in that like similes and metaphors are similar. These are similar in that they're both used for similar purposes. So alliteration is when you group some words together that start with the same consonant. In this context, it would be like in this case, it would be like if you put a bunch of words together that started with the same letter, but the letter has to be a consonant. It's called something different if you use vowels together. For example, if you put like unique underwear, they start with the letter U, but it's not an alliteration because they sound different. So not only do they have to start with the same letter, they have to sound the same as well. So next is onomatopoeia, which you mostly see these in if you've read comic books or graphic novels. These are pretty common in those. They're like boom or crash or just words that are used to describe sounds. And these are similar to alliteration in that they are used to like be wordplay and to make the text more interesting. Oxymorons and irony is also grouped together because oxymorons are when you put two words together that look like they should contradict each other, but they don't. So writing's not like math or science where there are like strict rules that you have to use, right? If I said perfectly imperfect, to take a lyric from probably a song, I think, perfectly imperfect, you will know what that means, even though like by the strict rules you shouldn't, because perfect and imperfect directly contradict each other. They're antonyms, but you guys still know what I mean when I say those because it's an oxymoron that makes sense. And then there's also irony. There are certain types of irony. For the main types of irony, there's dramatic irony, verbal irony, and situational irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters do not. So if the audience knows that so-and-so character is going to die by the end of the book, that's dramatic irony, but so-and-so character doesn't know that they're going to die. So they act in a way that like shows that they think they're not going to die, but we know they are. And then there's also verbal irony, which is when someone says something, but they mean the exact opposite thing. So if so-and-so character wants to murder character number 2, so-and-so character says, wow, I hope you live a long and healthy life, then the audience knows that so-and-so character doesn't actually mean that because they want to kill character B. Sorry if this is a little bit morbid. And then the last type of irony that I mentioned is, of course, situational irony, when you think something is going to happen, but really the exact opposite happens. I've learned this extensively in 8th grade literature, so be prepared for that. But that's like kind of when, say, as an example, if so-and-so character falls off a cliff, gets shot in the shoulder, and then drowns. Everyone's like, oh, he's gonna die, right? And a situational irony would be if he didn't die. Next, personification and symbolism. These two aren't that similar. I was kind of reaching with this one, but you get what I mean. Personification is, say, if you took if you like took an inanimate object, like if I took this boomerang and I was like, this boomerang is delicate and beautiful like a person, that would be personification. And I mean, if I compared it to a person, like if I said this boomerang is a person, the boomerang is obviously not a person. It is a throwing device, as it says over here, but I still compare it to one in order to further my story. So that's personification. Another one would be symbolism. So if I say I had a character, I said, this character always comes back. She is like a boomerang. That would be symbolism because this boomerang symbolizes this boomerang symbolizes the character. Symbolism and personification are both like way deeper than that. I used to explain it in very simple terms. So this workshop is kind of like an introduction into later things because we cover all of this material in depth in the narrative writing course, which is going to be released in summer of 2022. So if you want to like know more about this, then you should definitely sign up for that. Next is foreshadowing and hyperbole, which these two are not similar at all. I just put them together because they were the only two left and I didn't know where else to put them. Foreshadowing is a device that many writers use, most notably, Harry Potter is going to come up a lot, but most notably, the author of Harry Potter is pretty good at foreshadowing. Like when you read the books, you think, oh, like that was there. And it becomes more interesting the second time you read it because she'll say something and it'll just foreshadow the beginning. And foreshadowing is basically when, say if there's like a twist or something at the end that will happen at the end that's like sometimes surprising. Most of the time it is supposed to be surprising. And you as the author, you can put in little clues before the ending actually happens to like show that foreshadowing. So for example, if character so-and-so dies, I can foreshadow their death with tiny bits of moments and symbolism and other things to show that they might, which is foreshadowing, which when you put stuff in there, it happens at the end. And the point of foreshadowing is not to like throw the readers off. You want the readers to go, oh, that happened. And I'm not surprised because there was foreshadowing, but I also didn't expect it, which is good. And there's also hyperbole, which again is not similar to foreshadowing at all. But hyperbole is when you greatly exaggerate things for the sole purpose of just making it more impactful. Like if I said he was as tall as a skyscraper. So obviously, unless this is a fantasy book, he's not as tall as a skyscraper. He's probably like, I don't know, like 6 feet tall, which isn't the height of a skyscraper. But I want the readers to know that he is tall. Like, yeah, that man is definitely tall because the author said he's as tall as a skyscraper, but I know that he's not actually as tall as a skyscraper, but he's pretty tall. All right. So next, I'll tell you guys about the 5 senses and how to use them in your stories. And for this, we'll use this picture as an example. First up is sight. So you guys all know what the 5 senses is. There's, well, in American culture, at least, there's sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. First is sight. So if I were to describe this scene, these are some ideas that I would put out there. For example, what does the reader see? What do I want the reader to see? There's snow, lots of colors. You can describe like blues, purples, oranges, yellows, reds, pinks. There are trees and there are leaves. And you describe different things based on how you want the readers to feel and what you want the readers to see. Next is hearing. So some examples of this might be the crunching of snow, animal sounds, snow falling off of trees, stuff like that. Some touch, you could think maybe cold snow, warm clothes, sun rays, and wet leaves. And the last two, I was kind of reaching with this one, but there's taste, like hot chocolate and snow. Fun story. This one time my school went to Big Bear and the guide was like, okay, guys, I'm not allowed to let you eat snow, but I will turn a blind eye if you do so. So we ate snow. I eat snow every time I see it. And next is smell. Leaves have it, like if you know, like leaves have a smell, you can smell them. And the next slide is how to use language to further your story. So for this, I don't mean like Spanish or Chinese or Latin or something. I mean like how you word your words, like how you say them, because wording matters. There is action versus introspective. So I know many of you already know what action means. It's like an action scene is one where there's lots of moving, there's some fighting maybe, like there's a whole genre of books, TV, television about action. And then there's introspective, which is quieter, calmer. And ideally, a good story would probably have both. Maybe not action in the traditional sense, like fighting a lot or like using machine guns or something, but just in a different way. So I'll give you examples of both an action and an introspective piece to like really show you what I mean here. So the first thing is action. This is from Hunger Games. Both of them are, just to show you like they can both be in the same book and they should be. So action uses, so actually I'm going to read this out to you and then the boy slips to the ground. That's when I see the knife in his back. Already other tributes have reached the cornucopia and are spreading out to attack. Yes, the girl from District 2, 10 yards away, running towards me, one hand clutching a half dozen knives. I've seen her throw in training. She never misses, and I'm her next target. So anyone want to unmute or like raise their hand or say in chat, what do they notice about action? Like what kind of wording do they use? Some kind of language. I'll start off as an example. They kind of use shorter sentences. Does anyone else have any observations? Yeah, Brittany says tense. Yeah, it is very tense. That's because Suzanne Collins, who is the author of The Hunger Games, wants you to feel a certain way. Wants you to feel tense, that is. Alvin says Doug's nervous. Oh yeah, Brittany does say a bit of foreshadowing at the end. That is true. Bella says that too. Snowflake does look kind of nervous. Okay, Alvin says violent. Yeah, that is a staple of action. But again, it doesn't have to be violent if you're writing a calmer book. But in this case, and usually it is. Does anyone else see any, like, does anyone notice anything about this paragraph that they think might be related to that? But mostly the points were that when you're writing an action paragraph, yes, you want it to be tense because you want to like evoke a feeling of the reader being tense. And to do that, you use shorter sentences, like say, then she never misses. It's literally 3 words. Like Suzanne Collins has had longer sentences because she wants you to feel tense and she wants you to feel quick and choppy. Like the pacing is really quick in this scene. And we're going from point A to point B to point C real fast over here. So usually when authors write action sequences, they write it in short sentences in simpler words so that the audience can digest it quicker. The next type of scene that I'm going to talk about is introspective. So that's almost the exact opposite of action. This is also from the Hunger Games. It says, I want to do something right here, right now, to shame them, to make them accountable, to show the Capitol that whatever they do or force us to do, there is a part of every tribute they can't own. That rue is more than a piece of their games, and so am I. So first of all, obviously, she's using longer sentences, but does anyone else have any other observations? Like, how does this differ from action? What are some things about it? Repetition of ideas as well, like Alvin mentioned, repetition of words, but this also calls back to similar scenes that they had earlier on in the book. So what all of you guys said is a good point. Oh, someone else say something? Oh yeah, Brittany says that it shows that the character is desperate. She is in this scene. She's like trying to prove something because first decide what the scene is. Is it action, introspective? Is it funny? Is it sad, etc.? So I'm not going to write a scene where the character like slips on a banana peel in the same way that I want to write a scene in which the main character dies. Because that, first of all, that would be absurd. And second of all, it just doesn't fit the tone. Like, unless you're writing a specific kind of story in which like it helps the story, saying like saying using a funny tone during a sad scene usually just takes the reader out of it and it feels kind of jarring. Like, take Percy Jackson, for example. The narrator in Percy Jackson, well, I mean, the first series, the main series, Percy Jackson, is pretty funny. He uses humor in his narration, even in a lot of action scenes. But he never uses it during sad scenes. Like, there might be a bit of laughter or funny stuff, but mostly he doesn't use humor during sad scenes. And that's for a reason. He's funny in the other places because he knows when to be funny. So that's where you have to decide what the scene is. Second is the narrator. So I mean this first of all in the literal sense, like is it first person, third person, etc. But I also mean this like, what's the narrator like? Are they unreliable? Are they humorous? Or are they just factual? Because in say I mentioned the past example of Percy Jackson. He is pretty humorous. He uses funny language and generally he tries to like inject humor and lightness into his stories. But on the other hand, maybe you might take a character like Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games. She doesn't have time to be funny. She wants to avoid dying for the most part. So usually there's not much humor in the way she narrates, more so in like the events that happen in the book. So that's what I mean by narrator. Second is the pacing. So I'm not going to talk about pacing this much in this workshop, but if you want to know more about it, we do have like some parts of a lesson dedicated to pacing in the narrative writing workshop. I mean, in the narrative writing course that happens over the summer next year. Pacing means like how fast a story goes or how slow it goes. So say event A happens in the first chapter, event B happens in the second chapter, event C happens in the third chapter. Where the author puts these events is what pacing is. So the overall story of pacing can be pretty fast or pretty slow, but micro pacing in the scenes is where descriptive writing comes in. So if you want, so to the past examples of action and introspective scenes, in the action scenes, the pacing is pretty fast. Like, let's say Katniss shoots Glimmer, Glimmer dodges, Glimmer gets bitten by, this never happens in the books, Glimmer gets bitten by a wasp. Cato comes in and starts screaming or something. It's pretty fast. All of this happens in like a paragraph, let's say. But in the introspective scenes, most of the time, all they're doing is either like sitting there thinking, or maybe they're doing something else, but all the reader knows is that they're thinking, or they're talking to someone else. So maybe in like the course of a full chapter, it's literally just Katniss just talking to Peeta about a story that she does. And that's introspective because it's a slower pacing. It might just be like maybe 1 hour, but it's stretched out to a whole chapter. So next we have to use precise language. There are two parts to this mainly, is be specific, first of all. For example, if I wanted to communicate that her eyes were blue and I just said her eyes were a shade of blue like rocks, that wouldn't be very specific because the reader doesn't know what I'm talking about. Rocks can kind of be any color. Like if I just said blue rocks, that would to the extent be the same as saying blue paint, because paint can be any shade of color. And for the most part, rocks come in different shades of blue as well. So I want to say like her eyes, were they dark blue? Were they light blue? Were they like purplish blue? What shade of blue were they? Were they kind of warm? And depending on the character, you want them to have different traits as well. Because the character's appearance, like even especially over visual media like comics or TV, but kind of over books and short stories as well, how a character looks is kind of important. to how the reader perceives them. So if I say this character has dark blue eyes, she always looks angry, and she kind of folds her arms in a certain way. We know that like she's we know that means she's like maybe not so as outgoing, maybe she's kind of introverted, maybe she's kind of shy. But if I say the character had light blue eyes, she was always smiling, she spread out her arms for a hug, we know that she likes hugs. Like, instead of just saying this is why be specific can just be useful for more than one thing. So second is don't be overly flowery. If I say like salty water pooled in her eyes, like pooled in her eyes that were a sapphire deep shimmering blue with black orbs in the middle, like boba, the reader has no idea what you're talking about. Just say that she cried, like we get it. She had tears, she was crying, just say that she cried. But be specific enough so that the reader knows what you're saying, but don't be overly specific so that the reader gets kind of confused. So does that make sense? Like, I think the most simple way to describe not being overly flowery is I'm not saying that all fanfic is like this, but like the fanfic effect. It's kind of notorious, especially on Wattpad, for being overly dramatizing everything. Is descriptive writing as a device? Basically, why do we care? What is it used for? First of all, it's used for character. So let's take the Harry Potter characters as an example. J.K. Rowling uses descriptive writing repeatedly and with repetition in order to describe her characters. So let's play a quick game. I'm going to give you a character description, and then whoever can put in chat first which character it is wins. So let's take this character for example. J.K. Rowling describes this character as being like a bug, having wide magnified eyes by glasses, and having shawls draped over their shoulders, smelling like sherry and perfume. Yeah, exactly, Trelawney. Oh yeah, Isabella, if you want to know the how good the descriptions are, you should read the book. Yeah, Trelawney, it's Trelawney. So you guys could tell exactly who that character was just by a few words about them. So next, I think this one should be easier, like Half Moon spectacles. Spectacles and glasses. Half Moon spectacles, old man, yeah, dumb door. That's him. And another one, last one I can think of right now, hook nose, greasy hair, black eyes, black hair. Yeah, Snape. So J.K. Rowling uses descriptive writing to be able to describe her characters quickly. So even if I say these few words without mentioning their names, or even any other descriptors besides the ones that she put, then you can recognize them immediately. So the point I'm trying to make a point here, which is that that's how it's useful. Next is immersion. It keeps readers interested. So next, another use of descriptive writing is immersion. It keeps readers interested. So if I were to write a story, I was like, the dog walked into the room, the dog sat down, the dog walked out of the room. No one would care. I mean, I guess if you added pictures, it could be a children's book, but if you didn't, no one would care. But if I described the dog and I described the room, like the dog was white and yellow, and it would be better than that. But if I described the dog and I described the room, it would keep readers interested. So once again, we have like a whole section on audience retention in the narrative writing course next year. But those are pretty much the basics. If you use descriptive writing in an interesting way that's unique, but at the same time not too out there, like if you use it in the correct way, then it will keep readers interested and it will keep reading. And also it can be used to describe settings. So does anyone know what the white room syndrome is? I probably not, but maybe. Yeah. Okay, no one's saying anything. But yeah, so white room syndrome is when say an event is, oh, Brittany? Well, white room syndrome that I was thinking about was about like say an event is happening, a scene is going down, characters are fighting or they're talking or they're just like hanging around, and you don't describe the scenery. Like if that same scene could happen in a white room, like if they could be over a volcano and nothing would be different, then that's white room syndrome. So you want to avoid this by describing the setting as much as possible, keeping the readers immersed, and also like just making it more interesting. Like if you're having a fight scene and they don't use anything from the setting at all, like they just pretty much dance around the room and everyone else might as well just not be there. That's white room syndrome. But conversely, if maybe they're fighting on like a mountain and they use rocks to throw at each, I don't get out much. Next is some examples. And then I'll let you guys like try to do some of your own writing to show us. So first, the sun shone brightly on a stack of cauldrons outside the mirror shop. Cauldrons all sizes, copper, brass, pewter, silver, self-stirring, collapsible, said a sign hanging over them. Harry wished he had about 8 more eyes. He turned his head in every direction as they walked up the street, trying to look at everything at once. The shops, the things outside them, the people doing their shopping. This is from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. First chance, does anyone happen to like know what this is describing? Next is our part of District 12, nicknamed the Seam, is usually crawling with coal miners heading out to the morning shift at the hour. Men and women with hunched shoulders, swollen knuckles, many of whom have long since stopped trying to scrub the coal dust out of their broken nails and the lines of their sunken faces. But today the black cinder streets are empty. The reaping isn't until 2. May as well sleep in if you can. Which is also an example of descriptive writing. So does anyone know, like, have any like observations, like why this might be a good example or anything about like that? And it reminds me of Jamestown. Um, is that from someone? I've never actually heard of Jamestown, but wait, are you talking about like an actual place? Jamestown, Virginia? Is that where? Okay, yeah, that's cool, Brittany. Good observation. Next is, and the last one is, Millie is wearing a stunning sleeveless gown with a plunging yet still tasteful black top and a billowing white skirt. At least a foot of fabric pulls around her feet, which are encased in black high heels, but other than that, she looks Oscar ready, except for her face, which is closed off and remote. She's been like that ever since our weird brunch at Grand's 2 days ago, which ended abruptly when Grand declared a sudden headache. I thought shopping would for sure cheer Millie up, but she looks like she's just going through the motions. Polite, but not really interested. All right. Does anyone have any observations about this, why they think it might be good, or like what kind of devices they use? The first image that if you want to, you can write something about this. Just describe the imagery, just the 5 senses, using the device thingies to show people like what kind of feeling you want the reader to evoke. All right, so some people submitted stuff to me and they're all really good. I like them. I like reading them. It's pretty enjoyable. So next we're move on. Oh, by the way, I'm going to mention this again. In the chat, I put in a form. If you want to like submit the sentences that you already wrote for more in-depth feedback, then you can do that in here. All right. Or if you didn't get a chance to submit right now. So next is this picture. I'll give you a few minutes to try to write about it. All right, cool. So I think a lot of people have submitted theirs. Next is this picture. So I think a lot of people have sent that one as well. Next is this picture, which is the last one. So I guess that's the end. If you want to continue to submit your things,